Hi, welcome to Veterans Forum. I have been hosting and producing Veterans Forum. I think it's about 13, 14 years now. My name is PJ Scott, and yes, I'm a veteran. I was in the Navy waves from 71 to 79, so I am Vietnam era. And I am really pleased that I have two women veterans with me today who served in World War II. First, I have Jane Meermans, who made second-class petty officer in the Navy during World War II. Welcome to the show, Jane.
I didn't get the question.
What years did you serve?
I served from 43 to 46.
Okay. And then let's move it on to Hilda, who served in the WACs, Women's Army Corps. And Hilda, what years did you serve?
42 to 46.
Great. Aren't these gals really nice looking? We're going to have some more pictures to show you as we go throughout. Now, Jane, let's start with you. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Harmony, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. And you stayed there until you went into the military?
Well, I moved to Zelienople, Pennsylvania, and that's where I graduated from high school.
I see.
Pennsylvania.
And how old were you when you decided you were going to go in the Navy waves?
I was 20 years old, and my father had to sign for me because he had to be 21.
I see. Why did you decide to join the military?
I wanted to learn to live with girls because I knew I could never go to college. So I thought it was an opportunity.
Well, actually, I have a very small picture here, but the folks here at CMAC will blow this up. You actually had a sister who joined the military. What branch did she serve?
She was in the U.S. Marines.
Oh, a Marine.
Yes.
And then your sister-in-law?
And my sister-in-law?
Which branch did she join?
She was in the Army.
Okay. Now, is this a picture of her here?
That's her.
Now, folks here in Fresno, we're looking at a piece of history here. This woman, when she got out of the Army, how did she come to the Fresno VA hospital, which was very young at the time? We're talking immediately after World War II.
She was in San Francisco, and there was a doctor there that wanted her to come to Fresno in 1950 and open the physical therapy department. And she did. She was there for 20 years.
Wow. What's her name?
Elizabeth Meermans.
Elizabeth Meermans. Okay, so that's a part of Fresno VA history for those of you who may be interested in that. Now, Jane, we're going to leave you and talk to Hilda. Hilda, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Fort Dodge, Iowa, but I came to California when I was 8 years old.
And moved into
Fresno.
Yeah, wow.
Yes.
And what made you decide to join the Women's Army Corps?
Well, it sounds kind of silly, I guess, but it was patriotic reasons. I decided that if the women joined and did some of the office work, it would relieve the men to combat and get the war over quicker.
Well, and I'm sure that was a pitch that was made
Yeah.
to get women to join, and it wasn't just a pitch, it was true.
It was true.
It was true, yeah, because remember, we were fighting in the Pacific and the Atlantic. I mean, we needed every able-bodied man we could get.
Right.
Okay, so let's bounce back to Jane. Where did you go to boot camp?
Oh, I went to Hunter College in New York City, in the Bronx.
And did you find that difficult?
Some days were, yes, but some days I liked.
I never could get used to getting up so early. I'm trying not to use any adjectives here. Oh, please. Yeah, that was very difficult.
Right.
Yeah. And where did you, I think the Army calls it basic training. Where
Yes.
did you go for basic training?
In Des Moines, Iowa. And then after the basic, I went to school in a hotel in Des Moines, Iowa. They took over a hotel, and that was our base.
Really?
The hotel lobby was our mess hall. It was very interesting.
It sounds like it.
Yes.
And what kind of A school or training did you get after basic?
It was the business administration, and we had to march down the street up 2 blocks to an empty business building where we went to school And then we would march back to the hotel for our lunch and dinner and sleep in the hotel.
Now, how old were you when you joined Hilda?
24.
Oh, you were 24. How did your parents feel about that?
My father was very proud. He came to me when I left the house, and he said, I just want you to know no matter what happens or where you go or what you do, you're always welcome to come home. And
Now-
it made me feel good.
And we have a picture here with your brother. Did he
Yes.
join before you did?
No, he joined after I did. He joined the Air Force.
Oh, okay. And his name?
His name was Richard Jansen.
And did he make it through World War II? Did he come
Oh,
home?
yes, yes.
Good. Good.
And then we had a younger brother that joined the Navy, and he made it home too.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's a great photo.
The younger brother was on the escort ship to the president's yacht, and their job was, if anything happened to the president, they were to save the president. So he was on Chesapeake Bay all the time during the Navy.
I hope he wrote those stories down for his children and grandchildren. To escort the president is quite a privilege.
He didn't, but he got sick, and they operated on him with the president's doctor, and so his picture is in the president's library.
Oh, okay.
A full-page picture in the book.
Okay. Now, Jane, what kind of training did you get from the Navy?
After my training in Hunter, I went to Milledgeville, Georgia, to the storekeeper's school.
Oh, okay. Did you take a battery test, or was that just something they told you were going to do?
Yes, but I worked at Johns Manville as a payroll clerk, and I guess they thought I could do that kind of work.
How long were you there?
I was there for 2 years.
Oh, okay. So
No, I was there for 3 months training.
Okay, and then where did you go after
Then
your
I
training?
went to Portsmouth Navy Yard for 2 years, and I ran a wave shop that was connected with the ship service store.
Oh, so were they selling like uniform articles? or
Uniforms and stockings and
Specific
different
for
things.
women?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the men would come in there and, well, they go to the movies, and they would buy their cigarettes and beer and whatever they wanted. So that's what they did.
So when you got done with your training, where did you end up, Hilda?
I worked out of Albany, New York, in a recruiting office. But we spent most of our time attending bond rallies and doing anything to raise money to pay for the war. And I was always part of the scenery at a bond rally, sitting on the stage or coming late to the audience, and just to get attention.
Now, I understand you were a model for some Army uniforms for women that they were considering mass producing. Do you have any of those pictures?
Yes, I have a picture somewhere. It was a white dress, and I wore this uniform. The Washington, D.C. mailed it to me, and I don't know why or why they chose to mail it to me, but they mailed me this dress. And said,
this is a little bigger picture.
Yeah.
Let's show this one. Well, that almost looks like you'd be a nurse.
And
Is that what it was supposed to be?
No, it was a summer uniform for the Women's Army Corps.
Oh, okay.
And it was a matching hat, and it was white pongee material, off-white. And I wore that for 5 weeks to restaurants, bars, anywhere.
Right.
Anywhere, and I wore it and went across the country on the train with it. And the public accepted it 100%. It was a beautiful, we were really happy about it.
Right.
And then we became part of the regular Army, and the regular Army said, no, it has to be a khaki uniform. Then we were disappointed.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
because it was washable and didn't need ironing, and it was beautiful.
Didn't need ironing?
No,
God,
no.
I would have loved that
It was
myself.
beautiful.
Yeah, I bet. I
Yeah.
bet. So it sounds like you hobnobbed all over the place for these bond
Yeah.
rallies.
Oh, yes. I had 30 days temporary duty in New York City, and there we went to theaters and any place of entertainment. So I met a lot of theatrical people who were putting on shows, and we were always, well, for example, I was thrilled to death to be chosen to be one of 6 people that were a representative of each branch of the service, and we sat on risers behind the Glenn Miller Band when they get their last concert in the United States. And we were
okay.
sitting on risers up on the stage behind the band, He left the next morning for England, and of course, 2 weeks later, his plane was lost.
Right. For those of you that are into old movies, I believe it was Jimmy Stewart played Glenn Miller, and June Allison played his wife. That was very tragic.
Yes.
Very tragic.
But it was a real thrill to be on the stage with that band.
Uh-huh. What were some other big band folks you got to meet?
Well, Fred Waring and his wife was very nice, and Broadway people, because I was in a hospital once, and they came and put on a little show, and they put me in the show, and they said they liked what I did, and it was Ethel Meerman and this Dorothy Eldridge and a couple of other singers, and they were nice people.
Some people would say you had a dream job in the Women's Army Corps.
Yes.
Yeah. Now let's move to Jane. Jane, you went to where for 2 years for your job?
I went to Portsmouth Navy Yard. It was a dry dock where they brought the damaged ships into that place, and they repaired them, and the aircraft carriers.
Oh, okay.
Then on Sundays, the Navy waves got to go on what they called the shakedown, and we could ride on the aircraft carriers. And the Navy men would check all their equipment to see if they were ready to go back to sea. It was fun. We had a good time.
What do you remember some of the names of the aircraft carriers you got to visit?
I can't remember.
See, I'm not familiar with Atlantic ones. I was a Pacific girl.
They also made new ones there too, and then they would put them out to sea, and I went several times to their dedication or whatever they called it.
Right. I went to a couple of change of command ceremonies when I was in San Diego on board the aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was stationed at a naval air station, so yeah, that was pretty much principally.
Oh, we thought we were pretty smart to get a ride up on that deck.
Now, where did you actually leave port and go somewhere? Or?
No, we would just go out to sea in the afternoon
Oh,
and
I
then
see.
back by dark.
Oh, okay.
So we could go home.
Yeah, that would still, I mean, I didn't get to do that. I mean, it was moored. I stayed for 3 hours, met people, had cake and ice cream, congratulated the new captain, and I was gone. You know?
And my sister was in the Marines, and one day I heard there was a small group of lady Marines coming to the Portsmouth Navy Yard, and of all things, my sister arrives. She lived in the same barracks as I did, and so we had a good time for a few months until she was transferred to Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
But I stayed in the Navy Yard.
How long did you stay in the Marine Corps?
How long did she stay?
In the Marine Corps.
I think she was only in for about 6 months, and the
really?
war was over.
Oh, I
She
see.
joined late.
Well, that was really something. That's a nice memory that your sister and you ended up, because, yeah, I don't imagine there was enough Marine women to have a barracks just for them.
They had a little attachment of Marines there on the Navy base, so these girls worked down in their department.
And what was her job? What did she do?
She did some kind of office work. She did some kind of office work.
Yeah, that was me, a lot of typing and
Yeoman.
filing. Yeah,
Yeoman.
yeah, I was a yeoman. Hilda,
Yes.
what is one of your favorite memories of your time in service? Or maybe one that you really treasured?
Well, one of them was, I was a patient in the hospital in Staten Island, New York, and they woke us up early in the morning and told us they brought the nurses home from Corregidor during the night. And they said, do not talk to them, we have to debrief them. So we could walk by the door where they were patients, and we couldn't say anything to them. All we could do was smile and keep going. And it was hard to do because the nurses were there, and they were standing in complete awe, looking out the window and just staring, saying nothing. It was like they couldn't believe they were home. And that stayed in my memory for a long time, and I never forgot that.
Well, let's face it, I mean, I know something about military history, not that I know everything, but I think it's safe to say those women went through hell and back,
Oh,
just
yes.
like the men
Yes,
did.
yes.
Terrified that the
Yes.
Japanese were going to capture them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they abused them too.
Yes,
So,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. What's one of your memories that sticks out in your mind?
Well, going on those aircraft carriers was one of them.
Sure.
I guess, but I really enjoyed my years in the Navy. I really felt that it was important to go, and I went because my sister had married and had a little child, and I thought if I went in the Navy, maybe one more man wouldn't have, her husband wouldn't have to go. So that was one of the things the reasons that I went in.
Now, were you able to go home on leave fairly frequently?
Yes, to go home on leave. I lived with the Cal Hubbard family. My mother and dad separated, and my dad was an alcoholic, so he couldn't take care of us 4 kids. So I went to live with this family of Cal Hubbard, and he played in the Green Bay Packers for a couple years, and then he got into the baseball world and was an umpire and chief for, he was in the baseball world for 40 years. But my home was at their home, and I lived with them for 8 years, all during high school and then Navy years until I got married.
Now, talking about marriage, did you have a lot of dates, Hilda?
Not a whole lot, because we didn't date like people thought we would. But we had to be extremely cautious who we dated, but because of what the work I was doing.
Right.
We had to be spotlessly clean to be in the public eye all the time. But when at the end of the war, I was stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I dated a couple of the fellows there, but nothing too serious. But I did meet my husband, but he wasn't in the Army, he was in the Coast Guard.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, how did you meet your husband in the Coast Guard? This is after you got out?
No, it was at a dance in Rockefeller, not Rockefeller Center, in New York, and in what's the city, the center of New York? I can't think of it now.
New York City, the Big Apple.
Well, where everybody meets. Anyway, there was a USO dance there, and the Coast Guard boys were all there at the dance, and we went, and that's when he asked. His friend asked me to dance and asked me if I would dance with him, because he wouldn't ask me. Anyway, so I met him, and then he wanted to get married before he went overseas, and I refused, and so we married as soon as he came home.
Now, did you get a chance to meet your parents before you two hooked up?
Meet his parents? No.
What about yours?
No, he didn't meet them.
Oh, okay. So you just sprung it on your folks that you
right.
got. Okay.
Well, I married when I got out my discharge on my way home, and he was discharged too. So he was in Kansas and I was in New York, and my home was in California.
All right.
So I married in Kansas, and then we came to California.
I see. Okay. Before we get into the rest of that journey, let's get back to Jane. Did you have a lot of dates when you were in the Navy?
Not really, because I had my future husband was serving in the Air Force in the China-Burma area.
Oh,
he was an airplane mechanic, kept the planes, a mechanic that took care of the planes and keep them on.
So were you engaged when you went into the Navy?
No, not until he came home. But I rode him every day. I met him when we used to go roller skating. That was what I liked to do. And that's when I met him. And then during the Navy days, I went quite often to the USOs, and that was a skating rink. So I enjoyed those nights there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when he came home in 1946, we got married in June of 46.
Did you go back to Pennsylvania to get married?
Yes, I was in Pennsylvania. I was discharged too.
Right. Oh, I don't think in your days you couldn't be married, could you? I mean, that was my understanding. You could not get married.
You had to get permission to get married.
Well, in my day, you could get married, but if you had a baby, you were out.
You were out.
So
That's true.
That's changed it a little bit. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about challenges, because sometimes you can have challenges. When you were in the Army, Hilda, of course, it sounds like you had a dream job, but there must have been times where you were frustrated or challenged about your duties or some specific person. What for you was a challenge?
It wasn't really, everything was a a pleasure.
Oh,
What I was
cool.
doing, I didn't feel I was really challenged.
Oh, okay.
At one point, I
But then
worked,
you really did have the dream job, because most people can point to something that was.
I did. I was working at the separation center in New Jersey, and the fellows were coming home from Europe so fast, and we had stacks of papers, 10 or 12 inches high, of sheets of paper, and each sheet had names on it. And we had to update all those service records. And we got farther and farther behind every day, and it was a real challenge because the men that were working in our office were combat men that were home from Europe, and they didn't want to do office work, so they didn't do much work. So 3 women were trying to do all the office work, and we were getting farther and farther behind. So finally they put a stop to it, and they gave us something else to do, and hired assigned a bunch of men to do the records because we were updating service records. And we had to watch the teletype, because the teletype would tell us which men had to stay over and couldn't get discharged, and we had to take those numbers and put them on the books, and then those fellows that did not get discharged, and the ones that didn't, whose number didn't come up, they got discharged, and so it was kind of a stressful thing to know.
Oh,
that-
okay, so it wasn't all wonderful going
Right.
to the bands and
That was-
PRing new
yeah.
uniforms and so forth. So
This,
you did
this was
do a
the
little.
winding down, yes.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, what about you? What was a challenge for you, Jane, or a difficulty?
I really can't say I had any problems with that, but after I was assigned, after the war was over, I went to what they called Little Creek, and that was a discharge center where the boys, and we had to type up all those different discharge papers and so
Right,
on.
right,
And they
right.
went home to all over the country. And then I was discharged myself.
So did you just simply come to the end of your time, or they just decided they were winding down and didn't need your services anymore?
Well, I guess my time was up. I was ready to go home to get married.
Right, right. Well, you knew your boyfriend was already home, was he not?
Yes, he was already at home.
Now, what about you? Did you leave because your time of service was
Oh, yes,
simply
but
up?
the thing that made the most in my memory is the day that they dropped the bomb on Japan.
Oh.
I was working at the separation center then in Fort Dix, and one of the men yelled at us, "Listen, everybody, listen to this radio." He had a radio broadcast. We got around, we'd heard the broadcast, and they said that they had dropped this a mystery weapon, you know.
Right.
And so instead of jumping up and down with joy or singing and dancing, everyone stood perfectly silent, and one of the men finally spoke up in a very soft voice, said, "The war is over." And everybody stood there and did not say one word, turned around and slowly walked back to our desk and went back to work. We were all contemplating the fact that the war was over, and it was all in silence. And
Very solemn.
and
okay.
it was very memorable to remember that. So that was, of course. And then the other memory was when I was getting discharged. We were in a chapel, and they finally told us, "Okay, you're free now. You're free citizens. You're no longer in the army." And then we got ready to leave the building, and the organist played "Sentimental Journey" really loud.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
And
okay,
so that song sticks in my mind.
yeah. Now, Jane, what about you? You must have heard about the bomb being dropped. Were you in the military then, or were you actually
I
out?
was still in, I was home on leave the day that Japan, on that day in August in
Right.
'45. And it was a happy time for the whole town. Everybody got drunk that night.
Right, well, they were relieved that it was over.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
very much relieved that it was over. It's tragic that that's how that had to go, but I'm sure hundreds of thousands of more very tired troops would have had to go in there, and it would have been more American lives lost.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So, ladies, we're coming to an end. So I'm going to let each one of you say a couple of sentences about your time in service, and then we'll bring her down. Jane, what kind of thing would you like to say about your time in service? Clearly, I think you're glad you went in.
I really liked the service. I wouldn't want to go in today, but I really enjoyed my years of of living with girls and knowing I was being a part of something that was very, very important at the time.
And it was. Thank you for serving, Jane. Hilda, what about you?
Well, I was really pleased to know that I was part of something that was worthwhile, and what we did was recognized as something worthwhile, and it was a pleasure to have served. And there again, I wouldn't serve today because I don't think women belong in combat areas. But
I don't think that's preferable, but yeah, it's an all-volunteer force now, so if you don't get enough men, that's kind of the sticky wicket there, isn't it?
well, and the women can fill a lot of the positions and do a lot of the jobs.
Yes, well, that's what I did. Someone had to type those messages and all that stuff, so yeah, I did my bit, so yes, well, thank you so much for serving our country in a time of extreme need.
Right.
Thank you very much, and all you World War IIers, male or female out there, thank you very much, because if we didn't win that war, my family was from Santa Cruz, no doubt I'd be speaking Japanese, and I'd look ridiculous as tall Viking woman speaking Japanese. Nothing against the Japanese, but I'd look ridiculous. So thank you again. And if you're a veteran, God bless you. And if you are a family member who are taking care of a disabled vet, I would ask folks to pray for those families that have disabled vets from this current war that they have to be taken care of. And if you have a problem with the VA, because we're hearing some news, thank God we're not getting these stories in Fresno, you need to call your senator or congressman. Each office has a vet rep there, because waiting and waiting and waiting for your appointment is ridiculous. You need to go to your congressman and go to your senator. This is P.J. Scott with Veterans Forum. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Hilda. See you next time. God bless you.